All right, good evening and welcome to our final session of the May 2021 Teaching Math Teaching Podcast No Guilt Book Club featuring, and we got it right here, Teaching Math. I'm going to get this one of these days. Teaching Math at a Distance, a practical guide to rich remote instruction, and it's by Theresa Wills, and we have Theresa Wills with us. We have Dusty here with us. We've got the whole crew, and we've got the whole crew here the whole time. So this is great. We can end with a bang. So good evening. How are you all doing? You all see y'all. There you go. Just
doing
talking
fantastic.
Doing good, and really glad to be back. Really enjoyed watching the episode, the recording of your talk from last week. Watched it the next day, and my kids had a great band concert. So thanks for letting me go to that.
Excellent. Well, we gotta do those things, and it's part of the no guilt side, right? So
that's right.
Gotta take care of ourselves, and and the thing about all this material is, if someone sees this for a second and they're like, "Gosh, this is not the time," well, that's great, because these recordings will exist on, and we're gonna put links to it in the Teaching Math Teaching Podcast webpage, so there'll be evergreen materials, just like all the materials that are on Theresa's website, which we will put a link to it in just a second.
Awesome.
On the comments here. So we're now here to talk about chapter 9, which is the last part of part 2, which is about the learning stations, which I was kind of excited to see. It was like coming back around after we set the stage. We have all these strategies, and now let's think about how do we put the whole, it's like, how do we put the whole play together? How do we put it all together, all the pieces? And then just dealing with part 3, dealing with all the different, we're talking about assessment, talking about homework, and a call to action, which we're going to end with today. So you ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. And as always, if you have comments or questions, go ahead and post them. We have a few viewers out there, and then we can address those as we go. But I did have a question, Theresa. I did prompt you about this, but we're going to go from Alan Bellman, my colleague here at the University of Mississippi. And he had a question about, I think he's dealing with some synchronous and asynchronous, maybe dealing with some folks that are dealing with both those two modalities. And it's amazing, like those two words, how just in the last year, those have been thrown around so much. And like before, I know I wasn't using them all that much, but it's been an exponential curve on the use of that vocabulary. So his question was, what suggestions do you have for those in an asynchronous world? So those who are dealing with instruction that's not happening all at the same time, not like this live event here.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. And in the book, I have mentioned in some places where there's some activities that are really good for an asynchronous environment. But what makes my research and my background different is that a lot of my experiences are in synchronous. So that, that class time that we're together for. That's not to say that we don't have any asynchronous. As a matter of fact, I find it to be essential, especially in moments where we've, kind of did the deep dive in class, and then we have a span of time. Maybe it's one day, maybe it's 2 days. And I want my students to dive deeper. And this can be for really young kids, high schoolers, college students, whatever it be. And so when they're diving in deep, especially when they're at home or, working on their own, they have that kind of freedom to keep exploring. But I like to balance that in a lot of structure so that they're always successful. So you go home, you work on these things. These are the things that you're going to know that you're doing right to be successful. Here's where you can go for extra resources. And my favorite is anytime that I could have said something more succinct in a video, I'm going to save that for the asynchronous time. So if I know I'm going to be kind of rambling about something, I don't know if y'all do that occasionally, I try and just make a short video. And then they go and do that there. And our class time is mostly me developing questions and facilitating like an air traffic controller. I'm like, all right, you guys are here, you're here. This is your work. Now I'm going to bring this over. I'm busy, but it's not by talking. My students are doing the talking and the thinking. So it just, in general, asynchronous stuff, making sure students know what to do to be successful is probably the single most important thing. There's nothing more alienating than being home with an assignment and not knowing if you got it or not, and where to go for resources. And so, yeah, any of that kind of direct teaching, things like that, or if it's just a direct teaching and then a couple practices, I'll do that asynchronous, and then we come for the synchronous session, the live session, and we dig deep and we have the good questions bubble to the surface.
Nice. Thank you. And I know like that's, you're talking about like during that synchronous time, like being busy and interacting with the different work. I mean, we talked a lot last week about those rich tasks and all the different thinking that's going to happen within the students. And then it feels like that goes right well into talking about chapter 9 and the learning stations and all the different ways that you're kind of putting all the pieces together. It feels like this, like, hey, what is the macro sort of view of what you've been talking about from the entire book kind of lead into? So I don't know, Dusty, did you have anything that you wanted to jump into here?
Just as a non-expert's opinion, the classes that I was teaching last semester were asynchronous by design, but I was trying to incorporate some things that now I have language around it, looking at some of these activities that you've laid out in the book so nicely, Theresa. And so I'm having some thoughts about, okay, so when I do this next time, what sorts of things am I going to incorporate? How can I even incorporate some of these things and adapt them for my asynchronous setting? I think it goes back to what we talked about in the first conversation about what are the non-negotiables, what are the essential things that I want. And then it's not that this is a book on how to do synchronous online, or how to do if I want to do asynchronous, I need to get another book. But how do I use these tools to do the same things? And we'll talk about more of these as we go through learning stations and assessment and homework, I think, are just what are the main ideas. And then we're creative, we're teachers. That's why what we do. I've heard stories about teachers that just, blow off the lesson plan, blow the dust off of it and use it again the next year. But I've never been able to do that. It's not intellectually satisfying for me to just say, oh, yes, I know how to do teaching, solving with substitution. Here, just do this. So I like using these new tools and seeing what leverage we can get out of that and how we can accomplish what are our non-negotiables.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned the non-negotiables and the purposefulness, and that's really what I try and bring out in the book. So in the learning station section, you're not like, hey, here's a fun activity. Instead, it's like, here's how you get partner involvement, both the independent component and then the partner component. Mm-hmm. Or, here's how you get 4 kids to work on the same activity with related facts. Or when I say related facts, that could be because we're adding 10 or subtracting 10 in second grade, or we're changing the y-intercept by 1 in a high school. So, it's very purposeful in, I want this pedagogy. I want kids to work together. So what kind of tasks do I do? And how do I let my students know that they're being successful with that task as they're working on it in small groups?
Yeah, just like anybody, they want to feel like, hey, I'm making progress, right? I'm getting somewhere. I'm like figuring things out. And so that's really, beneficial. And I think too, and Theresa, there's a statement you say in chapter 9 over and over again, where it says, here are a few examples that you can modify to help reimagine your math class online. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe that's speaking right to what Dusty was saying. Like, I've got this language, I've got these ideas, and yeah, maybe the modality is not quite exactly matching up, but now I've got these things that it can allow me to I can modify these things. I can modify to help reimagine my math class online. So like, I think it's getting people closer there versus I think there was huge gaps, especially last spring, that we keep talking about, like huge gaps between I have these ideas or what I need to get done, what are the non-negotiables, and then I didn't have the language, I didn't have the activity, I didn't have these things to even. It would have been reimagining. Maybe it would have having a nightmare trying to figure out how to close that gap. And now we can get a lot closer with the resources and strategies and things that you've allowed or that you put in the book. So.
And a lot of those things at the beginning where it says you might want to try the following, just to put some context in case someone's, interacting that hasn't read the chapter. For example, guess my rule is a tried and true strategy for all grade levels. So in second grade, you give me an input, I'm going to do something to it, like let's say add 20, and I'm going to give you the output. Moving up into middle school, it can be a 2-step equation. Moving up into high school, it's going to be multiple steps in there. But essentially, you give an input, I give an output. That technique in itself is going to build cooperation. You just can't do it on your own. And so it's when we're in an in-person classroom, we maybe have had years of knowing why we like these games, but maybe not specifically put a title on it as this is going to force them to cooperate together. Whereas I think a lot of people, when they went online, they heard the crickets, or actually they didn't hear anything,
Right.
and they only saw the black screens. And they're like, how do I know if my students are being successful with this one? And so then we do things like we take a tried and true strategy, guess my rule, and we give them a slide where one person is typing in the inputs, the other person is typing in the outputs. They're working together on this T-chart or table in order to figure it out. And then they switch turns and the other goes. So it's just being very purposeful about the same things we've been doing in our in-person classroom, and kind of stamping a title to it that means something to us as teachers.
Yeah. I like the way that you put in some information about how Miss Lee did a partner game, and you kind of called it counterintuitive, because I was thinking, partner game. Well, I know my kids are used to doing breakout groups. And so I can put 2 kids in a breakout group and we can have interactive slides, and they can do their breakout group, with those 2 and do their partner game. But I really liked, and I just wanted to highlight it, the way that Miss Lee assigned 4 students to the group. So there's 2 partner games happening at the same time, but they're able to hear other students talk, which you would hear in the regular classroom. You would overhear somebody saying, oh, I added 10, or I know that these 2 numbers make 10. And so I know to do this, and they benefit from hearing the other students. So I thought that was really a great way. You don't want to put everybody microphones on the whole class, like it would be in the classroom, but I just thought that was really great.
And that just kind of comes from experience. Groups of 4 work really well in talking with each other. Groups of 3, I often find that, like, unless there's a specific role for each one, sometimes that third person can hide or maybe not feel like their voice is heard. Groups of 4 have this just nice vibe to them. And when I do partner games with groups of 2, sometimes they don't know what to do. I mean, I've said the directions. The directions are up there. Like, I totally did my job, right? Except it's not really done unless they know what to do.
Right.
And so when they're in groups of 4, they can listen to the other group, what they're saying and doing. And they can be a part of this kind of quad community, even though they have different sides. Yeah. Very purposeful. And not everyday thing, not every single time, but I try to put it in there because I knew it was something different that when people saw it, they're like, oh, wait, I could do that.
Yeah. And it's something that, maybe I'd like to try it and then see how it goes, and then try it again before I give up, and just let them experience that in that way. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, and it's, again, going back to that purpose, it's like, why are you having them in partners, like in a Zoom room on their own? And it's like making sure, like, do you have there's reasons for all these things that you're doing. And I just do want to hyperlink back to, we talked last week a lot about Smith and Stein, and like, it was like this hyperlink and seeing how this material, and takes on that framework of thinking about how we're going to use a rich mathematical task. So in the Learning Stations book, you build on Jennifer Lemp's book, Math Workshop, 5 Steps to Implementing Guided Math Learning Stations, Reflection, and More, grades K through 5. So I like that, because when getting exposed to different book, I've not read that book, so that's a good one to reference too. But I just love that you just overlay these books into the text, and thinking about how you're going to teach math on at a distance. So even to think like some of the simple things that you talk about in chapter 9 that are just like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And and that like the problems that people are going to run into unless you think like, so, just even the fact that you're going to have breakout groups, you're going to have them using interactive slides. And then, okay, so if you do that, you better come up with a way to organize and name them, because all of a sudden you're going to have, just all these different things going on and even to how to display them so you can figure that out. And so those are things that, a teacher is probably going to they're going to come run into that problem and have to deal with it. But here it's like, hey, let's cut this off at the pass. Like, here, let's use some experience. You're going to have to figure some of these things out in order to effectively use your time and to do this sort of thing. Because like you're saying, during class, it's not like you can sit back and name a bunch of slides. No. You're interacting. You're looking around at everything that's happening.
You're busy.
Yeah. That's right. And I remember that too. It's just when I was teaching, I taught with Core Plus and did a lot of group work. And so, it's a lot of it was being facilitated within groups, but it was like, I was exhausted because I'm, cruising around in my rolly chair, trying to interact with groups and, trying to just hear the thinking that was going on. So when we did the summarize the mathematics, how to highlight things, but even just to figure out how we're going to set up these, online spaces in order to do that similar thing. And then getting again, another great example of what's going on within the example classroom of the learning stations. And so this structure, how did you, you obviously just didn't start doing this initially. How did you get to implementing this? Cause it's well thought out. So what would maybe even the bumps in the road that happened, Theresa?
I've got some of those. Yeah, let's share.
Yeah.
So I started off with a math workshop with Jennifer Lemp's books several years ago. And the great thing about this, I got to give a shout out to her. She worked really closely with me when I was working on this chapter, asking me some of those questions that are so essential. So if you are going to do learning stations or math workshop, as she calls it, in the in-person classroom, it doesn't matter what grade you teach. You're going to be thinking, what materials do they need? How are the materials organized so that when the 5 groups put them away, they're not shoved in a corner and then I've got next period coming in or next week I want to use them and they're all everywhere. So I've got structures, I've got organization. They need to know how to be successful. I keep coming back to that because now these chapters we're getting to is all about students taking that ownership themselves and independence. So they need to know how to be successful. And there's so many components that are in there. How do you pick your groups? How many people in a group? Which personalities go together? Which ones don't? What jobs do they have? Are my students going to automatically know how to talk together? Or do I need to model it? Do I need to bring another teacher in here and show what that interaction is going to be like? And so those are all things that Jennifer Lemp talks about in the math workshop book. They're the same thing that we do online. We just do them differently. So I had familiar with the math workshop situations. And when I first went to synchronous settings, that was slightly problematic for me. I was like, how do I get this interaction in these situations? One of the classes I was doing was a prob stats class for math specialists. So these are K-8 teachers who want to be math leaders in their school, and they're taking a prob stat class with me on prob stat in K through 8. Well, that's filled with games. How on earth do I do that online? How do I do simulations? How do I do theoretical versus experimental and more? And so, it kind of came out of this, they have to be able to do it themselves. I can't do it for them.
Yeah.
So what affordances do we have? I found some virtual manipulatives, some websites, simulations, but relied on Google Slides for most of the you share, I share, we share kind of characteristics. And bumps in the road. Probably the biggest bump will happen no matter your modality. It's not thinking about the groups ahead of time. Just saying, random grouping. Experienced teachers will tell you that it's important to think about your groups ahead of time. So since then, I usually have a slide. It's got my, class roster, and it tells them if, so Joel and Dusty, you'll be in group 1, and then you move yourself, as opposed to me having to do all that traffic controlling.
Oh, yeah.
They move themselves. It also gives me a heads up of like, hey, who's in front of their computer right now? Because you just moved yourself. So there's a lot of components there about the partnerships. And when we have too many people in a group, like 5 and 6 people, there has to be a lot of structure, even though that seems counterintuitive. 5 to 6 people, everyone's quiet. Like they're not going to talk. That's too many. But when they have certain jobs, like I'm the secretary, I'll write on the slides. I'm the mayor. I'm going to make sure every voice is heard. I'm the timekeeper. Those typical ones. That works really well. So, gosh, what were the bumps in the road? The same ones that you would have had in an in-person classroom. And the only difference with being online is just making sure that they had their place to type their thinking or put their thinking or had a picture. Whereas in person, that may have just happened a little more naturally in their own personal notebooks. But here it kind of becomes part of the whole team's work.
We have a question from Shannon. And I'm going to try showing the question. We're going to get fancy here. So let's see. There we go. Look at that. How often do you change your groups? Is it better to keep them in the same group so they're used to which group to go to?
That's a great question. It depends on your community building goals at that time. So at the beginning of the semester or the beginning of a school year, I'm going to kind of shuffle kids in at random, see how they go. I'm going to tell them I'm regrouping, but really I'm determining which groups are really good together, like how that's working. Because at the beginning of a school year or semester, I want people to feel connected with at least one other person. So I'm looking for those good matchups, and I just tweak them until I get there. When I have a good matchup, that's like my home group. I write those down. Those are the ones when I have the tough questions, the tough mathematics, the debatable things. I'm going to make sure they have that comfort zone, but I don't want them just in that comfort zone. I want them, moving around. So I'm very purposeful about like, oh, this is a 3-minute activity. I want random pair shares just so that they can learn somebody else, but it's only 3 minutes, so no big deal.
Right.
So I would say it's similar to thinking ahead of time about the math, but you're also thinking ahead of time about the community building. Do you want comfort? Do you want a low risk task where there's high risk for community involvement because I'm learning somebody new, and balancing those?
And that was cool I believe in the learning stations where there was some groups that were set up at times for like, maybe there's a remediation task or make sure we provide support for something, and then it gets mixed up into something else. And I mean, again, going back to that intentionality and purposefulness that you're going to have in your decisions, and same thing goes with groups. Excellent.
I'm going to ask a naive question. I did teach 4th grade for a year, and I did try to incorporate learning stations, and my classroom management was subpar. I mean, that's what you could look at my evaluation from my principal, and she is correct. So I really like the setup that you have. You kind of have this opening slide that has must do the blue stations, can do the gray stations. I just love the idea that this is virtual. You're using a slide deck so that students you don't have a materials management issue. It's not like, oh, I don't have enough dinosaurs for this activity for 2 groups to do it at the same time. But I was wondering, so just from a management issue, do you just let your students go? And I like the fact that there's choice in there, or do you have like a certain, like, we're going to spend 6 minutes on this whatever station you pick first, and then we're going to rotate through? Like, how does that go?
Sometimes the very simple answer is I'll put I'll assign a timer. There's always something to get them to talk ahead of time. Whoever has the most pets, you're going to be the timekeeper. So by doing that, they're going to be like, hey, how many pets do you have? So even my quiet kiddos will start to have a voice. So they have a timekeeper. Sometimes in the bottom notes, I'll say this activity should take 11 minutes.
Okay.
If they're way over, I check in. So the cool thing about Google Slides, what I love about this over the in-person classroom, is I've got each group's slide decks there. I'm like, group 2, all right, you've got 2 representations. I can see one person's on slide 6 and 4 people are on slide 8. Like, what's that one person doing? Let me go check in there. Or this group is, way down in their slide decks, but they have nothing on their slides. Let me jump in and just hear. Sometimes they're off on a really rich conversation, but they just haven't typed it. And other times there's a lot there. And I'm like, wow, how did you fly through that? I go in and I'm like, I don't hear any conversation. So, bringing up those things, but it's almost like, I'm going to have to reframe the words here. It's almost like you're spying in, but really it's classroom management, right? Yeah. Like you're seeing who is doing what, where they are, and they're thinking through it. And as a rule of thumb, I never go in a group and say, so what are you guys doing now? I go into a group, I listen for a minute, I look at their slides for a minute. I come in well-versed in what you're doing, because the last thing I want to do is interrupt your train of thought. So you all are talking still, and then I'll come in and I'll say, I've noticed you all are on slide 3. You've got 2 examples. It sounds like you're thinking of a third one. Have you tried a number line or something like that? So, I tell my students, again, regardless of age, that's how I show respect and responsibility for being your teacher, is I'm doing my homework before I interrupt or I talk with your group.
Yeah, I just think it's really, it's removing some of the hurdles, like the materials preparation, or what do you do when it's over? You just make a copy of the presentation and you have enough for every group that you're going to do. But it allows so many more opportunities to get a glimpse of those students thinking from your one seat, looking at, all the different slide presentations. You can know where all the groups are at and what's going on. I'm excited to try this at some point.
And then there I had, it was 8 examples of different types of things. Whole group things on the bookends, but small group in between. So there are 6 activities there. And if a teacher's first starting this, I wouldn't necessarily recommend having all available, but being very obvious and upfront with the students that we're doing this whole class. There's a must do and a can do, which, by the way, might change depending on what group you're in. I always want to provide access, but start students where they're going to be most successful. And then a whole group summarization so that kids can see, what's the sequence of stuff? Why am I doing this stuff? How is it going to start and end? And once they get the hang of those 4 pieces, then we add a 5th, a 6th, so on.
Yeah, cool.
Right. So again, I think chapter 9 kind of brings everything together, and again, another good example of it in action. And so having that structure and then all the rest of the chapters beforehand and kind of how you get there. And then we get into, what some people are maybe waiting for is the part 3, which we're talking about, consolidating and assessing learning. So thinking about assessment, thinking about homework, thinking about some of these things, like how do you handle these things, Theresa? That's the kind of the questions. And this was important for me. And even the things that you were talking about before is like looking in on their slides and seeing what their thinking was, or even picking, we're already talking about formative assessment. And so, and you get into that right away in chapter 10, but I don't know, things about assessment. And I think a lot of people probably had a lot of things either that they figured out or things that they struggled with regards to assessment in whatever their modalities were that they were this past semester, or this past year. So maybe to start off, like any overarching ideas that you'd want to share to someone that maybe hasn't peeked at the book yet.
So this will be a very polarizing opinion here, but I love photo math. And I can tell you why, because of these last 3 chapters here.
Awesome.
And what it does is it's a reminder to me of the generation of kids that we are teaching. We're not going for the space race and putting Sputnik up and being the fastest human calculators we can be, right, because we are going to beat and win this space race. That's not where we are anymore. We haven't been there in a while. And when I look at future employers and where they want students who can see something and say, here's our classic one, a cylinder. Don't just plug it into the formula. Now I've got a Pringles can that has a different lid to it. So you better be able to figure out what part of that formula is the lid and pop it off, because this is the piece I need. Mm-hmm. So these their future jobs aren't about solving the problems that are in the book that practices computation. Mm-hmm. It's looking at the computation and saying, here's what here's what we did, but now we need to take off the top and bottom and double the height of the cylinder. What do we have to do? Mm-hmm. And we don't need to start from scratch. We use what we have and we modify it. And so that's just one example, but photomath isn't going to be able to do that, right? They're going to be able to give you the step by step. But then if you pick an alteration, are you going to double the radius, double the height? Are you going to, keep the same volume, but make it smaller and more compact? Mm-hmm. That's something they're going to have to figure out, and photomath can't help them. So it's really going to test to see, do you understand the concepts? It's not going to be right there for them. They're really going to have to think about it and test some things out. So there's my polarizing view.
I don't think that's polarizing.
You have on that?
Well, no, I mean, I've seen some sessions at conferences, how to, or even blog posts, how to beat photomath, what are some ways that we can put things in. And that was, when I was teaching calculus last fall, it became pretty obvious that I was not familiar with all of these online derivative, how to find the derivative of this function. But there are some of them that are like photomath, or maybe photomath does this, we'll find the derivative and show you step by step how you do that. But I guess I don't want to approach it from a defensive position. Like, I don't want to just, smack down photomath, just like I don't want to, my teachers before me would, want to, remove calculators from the classroom, or tell you, like you mentioned, Theresa, somewhere in here, you're not going to have a calculator with you everywhere you go. Well, now we do. And we maybe have more than one that we carry around with us all the time, or we're, in constant access, have constant access. And I think I might have told my students at some point, well, you need to know what to do, because the calculator won't do it for you. Well, if I change the word calculator to app, maybe the app does do it for you. So instead of playing defense to try to get back to wherever we were in this imaginary golden era, where very few people understood very much mathematics, maybe we could think about how we could leverage and use these tools and then do the real mathematics. I think, Theresa, you had said, are we trying to get students to be really good at arithmetic, or are we trying to get them to do mathematics? I have these old math books from like the late 1800s and early 1900s, and there was not a calculator around back then, but the problems that they were asking, which were really relevant to their real world, are no longer relevant. I'm not interested in, I don't know anybody who's interested in figuring out, how much of a certain crop is used in these units of measurement that I don't understand. Or even with money, things were priced at something and a half cents, and we don't mess with half cents anymore. Maybe at the gas station, you've got that weird little 9 that shows up per gallon. But I mean, that's not where we're trying to get back to. And so I appreciated the fact that for assessments, for summative assessments, you front load and you say to the students, here are the resources you can use, and here are the resources you cannot use. And I have colleagues that are super restrictive on their tests for their online classes, because just cheating is bad. I will go ahead and I will agree with them that cheating is bad. But what do we mean by cheating? Do we mean asking some online platform? You mentioned Quora or Chegg, where I could say, here's my problem. Can you give me an answer in 30 minutes or less? I hope. And that's not what we're looking for. But how can we as teachers organize the different sorts of things that we want to show where they demonstrate the mathematics? And I'm jumping ahead to the homework section, but instead of doing 30, 15, 10 homework problems, what if I have you do one, for lack of a better word, performance task, where you really invent your own problem and show me how you can solve that? in an interesting way. I thought that was great. I thought 3-act tasks, I have a hard time making my own 3-act task. Why would I ask a 4th grader to do that? But they would love to do that. Some of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They love to do it. They all want to be YouTubers.
Right.
I say all. I realize it's not all, but gosh, if you ask 4th graders, like, do you think you'd be a good YouTuber? Oh yeah, I'm going to be the best one out there. They love it. And
my son's on that list, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes. So, taking from that, and a lot of what you mentioned there, Dusty, does come from my background in computer science also. I've always been a deriver. I can't really memorize stuff, but I'm really good at writing a program, whether it was the TI-83, which I was doing in high school, and, putting those programs together, or, if it's for thinking methodically, step by step by step, like what would make sense to be next here?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a more efficient way? Is there a more conceptual way? So that's the way my mind's always going. But when we think about 3-act tasks, aren't we doing the same thing? Aren't we asking students to think about your end result? What do you want the person to do? What are the steps before? Like, where's the little hint? That's a hint, but not a giveaway.
Mm-hmm.
The kids are great at that. They've been watching how you put Orbeez in a pool. They know where the hint is and when these things are going to explode everywhere. So they're familiar with it. And so if we can give them these tasks here, they get to have fun, use a skill like videoing and coming up with a listicle about 10 ways you can do this. Mm-hmm. That's their world. That's what they consider fun. And it's practical. It's where they're going to see their mathematics.
Yeah. I was just thinking of having kids create an online quiz, of which type of triangle are you, or something like that, instead of which Disney princess.
Oh, that'd be very clever.
Yeah.
Oh, I could see all sorts of different ways of changing the triangles. We just did one where we were looking at, in one of the classes I was teaching, we were looking at food deserts in
Mm-hmm.
3 cities. So we were looking at in-center, the circumcenter. We're looking at all these different parts
Mm-hmm.
of the triangle and deciding where the next one should be. And just some really great conversations that were happening around that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, and that's I was just driving in rural Mississippi yesterday, and in a food there's definitely a food desert, and like thinking about like where's the nearest grocery store. And like those sorts of problems, and thinking about if it's using some of the mathematics that we're looking for, and one of the books we talked about. I don't have it here, but high school math lessons to explore social injustice. Has those types of problems where you can adapt it to your local context, or the context that are presented in there, and you're like, it's like not a problem. It wouldn't feel right to cheat on this problem. Or use something like I'm going to use stuff to help me figure out the answer, because the answer is pretty darn important, right? And or else to think like, how do we rethink the kind of things that we're doing, or like you say in the previous chapter, reimagine some of these things. And it's, a lot of the conversations we had at our institution, well, some of the conversations that were happening were about how they could maintain what they were doing that was already outdated in a face-to-face environment, and it was really outdated in an online environment. And so like, how do we think about things creatively that actually is more effective at getting at some of the things? And I'm going to jump ahead. Like you talk about in the finals, they talk about pedagogy at the forefront about everything. And the first thing you say is pedagogy is about teaching math for understanding. And again, going way back to the first chapter, it's not about calculation or arithmetic, right? We want conceptual understanding. Yes, that's a part of it, but still the conception, looking for understanding, that's going to take stuff, more creative tasks than maybe we were exposed to, or at least I was exposed to as a learner. So,
yeah, there's kind of 2 areas. When students leave a math class, I want them to be independent, to know how to do stuff without needing help, and I want them to see math in their world.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the more opportunities we can give them through homework to say, oh, where's math in my world? I got a skateboard. can I use that in my picture? Sweet. So like they do a skateboard, and the assignment might be to use different units of measurement between centimeters, meters, things like that to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
But they're describing their skateboard, and they probably have a decent connection there, as opposed to the problem that talks about, again, eating a lot of cookies and candy. Like, I'm sick of those ones, right?
Mhm.
So, how do I take things that are mine and personal to me? And then that personality comes out in the whole class. So as a teacher, I'm like, sweet, you all just, for your homework assignment, just created like an estimation game for me. And now I have 32 of these. I've got my warm up every day for these next 2 months. And they're personal. So I'm going to go to Eric and say, would you tell us more about your skateboard, how you got this one? And I'm going to hear a little bit more about my student. They're going to see math in their world. And it's not going to be some, canned problem about pieces of candy.
Mhm.
Right. And
Yeah.
it kind of encourages students have a buy-in and they actually want to do this. And so you have more students doing this. I think some of these, you had mentioned reusing, the skateboard thing, and you're going to use that for your warm-ups for the next whatever period of time. But then also when you had homework that builds from day to day, like what we do Tuesday, we might be using in class on Thursday. So I want to make sure maybe the first time you might have some kids that are reluctant to participate, but later on it's like, wait, I want mine to get picked, or I want to see what they're interested in. So.
And what you mentioned there, Dusty, is the move from homework is a gotcha. You didn't do it, gotcha, to homework. I know my teacher values what I do, and I'm going to see that on Thursday. So that's why, that might be the intrinsic motivation that I need, not just the I'm going to get in trouble for not doing my homework kind of situation. But yeah, there's so many examples that shouldn't stop after you do the calculation. Shouldn't stop at home. And they shouldn't stop the next day when you go over them also. They should be infused into the next part and explored further and discussed further.
Yeah. And these are also great examples that you have. Several of these are ways that students are finding things around their own world and how math relates to it. And so my son is just about done being a junior in high school. But he likes to just bug me and say, when do we actually use this in real life, Dad? Because he knows that I'm going to have lots of answers that to give him about that. Just last night, I was like, but when do we really use calculus, Dad? I was like, oh, well, let me tell you, But I like these facts where this is where we use math. Yeah, we use math all the time, and they have examples where every week they're doing something mathematical in their own life and then sharing it with the teacher, with the other students in the classroom.
Yeah, it gets switched. The thing gets switched around that the teacher can ask the students, "Hey, where are we going to see this stuff?" And they have ideas on where they can see.
Yeah,
like when I was tailgating, and my son responded to me with some calculus about why that was a bad idea. And my acceleration would be my derivatives. I did want to, in the assessment chapter, there was a tool that I really liked. I just wanted you to talk to the observation planning organizer. And that seemed like kind of an overall plan if going into these environments to think of like, how am I going to observe this? Could you just give a little bit of intro on that, or maybe how that came to be? Or
Sure. So that comes out of the Formative 5 a book. And one of the neat things about this is looking at formative assessment. How on earth do you know if your students did it right, if they did it right for where they're supposed to be, what you do next? And just, summative assessments are easy. I get a score and then done. But formative assessments are really that idea of my students are all going to do this task, and they are going to be in various levels of understanding at that time. I want to take where they are and move them to their next, area without maybe too much of a jump, but definitely not too much scaffolding either, where I'm doing all the work for them.
right.
So this format, which I really like, is an opportunity for us to really be able to see what is it that you can do, where looking at learning progressions. Where are you coming from? Where are you going next? And kind of this, how do I get you there? It feeds off of things we talked about in the other chapters. You need to be able to anticipate this stuff ahead of time. Being able to anticipate both misconceptions, but also these groundwork conceptions, these things that are very essential to being able to understand. And so this, the observation guide is really all about giving you structure to figuring out, how do I really do a formative assessment and know what to do next? And it might be a simple analogy, but just going back to my first year of teaching, I always kind of looked at formative assessments of like, are all the kids nodding? Okay, then that means I can go on. Or, are they looking busy? So there's these things that we could observe.
Yeah.
But this observational guide is very purposeful. Like, how do I know that this is going to work? And I anticipate this all ahead of time.
Right. How would you know it if you see it? I mean, that's like, so what do you expect to observe? How would you know it if you see it? Like the challenges and misconceptions you talked about. And then the one that even having, okay, I've got those answers. Well, how will you record and provide feedback online of what you observed? I mean, that takes it to, okay, and how do I let the students know in on the secret, right? Or it's not a secret, but in on like, oh, I saw this, and like, give them that encouragement, or that I see what you did there sort of perspective. And even how to technically do that too. If you're seeing it you're in one Zoom room and you can see it in another room, you can use the chat feature on the slide, which I really love, and say like, I saw this, and there we go. Keep going with that.
Putting a little text box on the slide that lets them know, I already saw 3 representations. You guys are great at these representations. How about we do it abstractly? Whereas usually I find that I'm asking the exact opposite, but that would be one example. And so it's not that I'm just trying to push them to the next thing. It's purposely acknowledging, what did you do here that was so great? Like, you need to know that you're awesome at this part. Because also, I'm going to ask you to say that part out loud. Like, you're going to share that with the class. So part of it is making sure that they're understanding of those, but to be able to put a comment in at any time on someone's Google Forms or Docs or its sheets, or going into Zoom and doing a private chat to that student. There's so many opportunities that make this an affordance that maybe you wouldn't have in person. So I really try to take advantage of those.
Nice.
Yeah, but it's hard to do that face to face. The private praise, because you don't want to make a big deal about it. You just want to let them know, I like what you're doing. But if you just like sit there and smile at them, then they might think, well, did I do something wrong? What's going on here? Or you get other kids like, why are they not letting me in on that? And sometimes you want to just let that student know, or let that group know. Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Dusty.
I was going to say, hey, Joel, I think it's time to maybe ask Theresa that final part that you were going to ask her.
So in the final piece of the book, it's the go and make a difference piece. And it's kind of like the broad advice for those that are attempting to do some of this work. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of time at our end of our final session here, final chat. We are going to do a summative podcast too. We're excited about that. That'll be in the near future.
These are formative podcasts. These are formative conversations.
Yeah, it's a formative conversation. But I just wanted to give you a chance to it seemed like some big advice that you had for folks that were going to do this. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of time to share a little bit.
Yeah, there's a couple things here. There's the saying, you go fast to go slow. I'm messing that up, aren't I? It's like, go slow to go fast. There we go. Wow. So if we're going to do a good job at something, probably the most important thing is recognizing and showing our students that we're learners also. We have this lovely opportunity right now where we're allowed to make mistakes in teaching. I don't think that there's ever been a time where I felt so allowed to do that. And so we're allowed to make mistakes in teaching. We're also allowed to, turn those into successes, have these moments, and be able to show our students like, look, I accidentally logged out of Zoom when I meant to just leave the breakout room. That's happened maybe before. And so I was glad that when I came in, I saw groups 2 and 3 where they were on track, ready to go. And I was able to get my things together. So part of it is, if I'm willing to make mistakes and make that a culture that my students see, they're going to do it when they do messy tasks, rich tasks, juicy tasks. So I can't just say, I want you to make mistakes. When I make them, I need to make them obvious too. And I need to give myself grace. I need to be able to be calm with it and say, oh, that one didn't quite work out, did it now? And not beat myself up over it, and not say I'm sorry 20 times to my students, because when I'm modeling that, that's what they're going to do when they make mistakes in those messy tasks. So that's the first part with going and making a difference. Go slow, make mistakes, make them public, make it a part of your culture. And the other one is, I think there's that saying of don't say anything a student can say. So I really bring that up in this conclusion and this last bit here, because I think it's common for us, especially math teachers, to show step by step. Here's how you copy and paste. Here's how you take a screenshot. Here's how you use this tool. And at very young ages, I've given an example where, and it happens to be on page 238, but it'll say things like, can you color this bear? Can you type your name in? This is a scavenger hunt about Theresa. Can you put your age here? Can you cover this up with a clip art? And for some students, they'll spend a few minutes on it, be like, wow, that's almost hard. I put my name on it and I'm good. Others will have this cool background. They'll add a bunch of other pieces to it. And I bring it back to don't say something a kid can say, because it's like, don't teach something where they might already be not only proficient at it, but maybe they can teach it better than you can. And so they can kind of take over that time. So I make a little list of my students and I'll be like, oh, Gabby's really good at backgrounds. Gabby always puts background on everything. So if somebody's like, hey, I need graph paper, but I don't want it to move, I'll be like, hey, Gabby, can you teach them how to go put graph paper on as a background? And I'm not responsible for that. So that's kind of part of that. Don't do anything that they can say. But yeah, perhaps the biggest takeaway from this, the biggest conclusion is, we want students at the end of their 12 years with us to be able to be independent, to be contributing to their world. And it's not by sitting back and listening and watching, it's by being an active member in it. So a lot of this book is all about how to make kids an active member in their class, how to release ownership, to give them independence, them responsibility. And so part of that is a mind shift into teaching. But it's nothing that I invented. All I did was take, like, what do we do in the in-person class and how do we do it online? And let's name it if it's got a pedagogical impact.
Awesome. And you said again, pedagogy is about teaching math for understanding, but then you said pedagogy is about teaching social norms, pedagogy about building communities of learners. And I think that was a great, encompassing, like, what's behind this book. Yes, it's about the mathematics. It's about the groundwork that needs to go into place in order to do that well. And then just about what you said here is like using the technology to facilitate that understanding, facilitate that relationship with mathematics. And I think you've done a great job of giving us, again, ideas to help us grow closer, give us the language, give us the tools, the strategies to get closer so that we can like you say in the book many times in chapter 9, of reimagining how we could use this within our own instruction. So I really appreciate it. Dusty, any final things here?
Well, this has been a great book. I'm really glad that I got to participate in this book club, and I read the book. And I liked the advice, make once, use 7 times. This is good advice. If we have I did when I taught 4th grade, I did have some materials that I handmade. It makes me sound like a craftsman. I just cut pieces of paper out, printed stuff on them, but try to think of how many different games could we play with this, or how can we use this in a different way, or how can we use it again in the same way on a different day. And I really like this idea of making something once and using it 7 times, because some of these are labor intensive. We can get really creative. We can make some great,
100%.
slides that we have that we use over and over, and we really should. And so go back to that earlier question. In my asynchronous class, I found a really great way to have students share their solution strategies in an asynchronous way, where they're doing the homework and then later they're sharing their strategies. And I'm not making an answer key. I'm not grading things, but they're sharing their solutions in different ways. Some students are using video. Some students are, taking a screenshot of their work. Some students are explaining it in words or using, other ways to do that. But that worked so well. The first time I did it, I thought, okay, this is my template, that I'm just using this. And while I'm making this template, I'm teaching this class again in the fall. I don't want to make this all over again. So how am I setting this up so I can use it 7 times? And that was really great advice.
Yeah. And Dusty, what you just mentioned there wasn't about how you would do a derivative, or in 4th grade, like how you would do multiplication.
Mm-hmm.
You never brought up content. What you just brought up there is how you would reuse the pedagogy, how you would reuse the template, and so that's exactly it. I'll reuse things for different contents, but the idea that first it's a game, then it's a sort, then it's a matching, then it's this. I gave myself tennis elbow one year from cutting out manipulatives. I am right there with you. But if I am doing that for every lesson, clearly I'm not using my resources wisely. If I can cut them out and use them for 7 lessons, students are going to see it different ways too. And so, the same goes with templates. A lot of the things that I have up on my website, so that was theresawells.com/templates, are mostly kind of blankish stuff. Like there's a structure, but it's relatively blank. There's the title, there might be 3 boxes below it, and a structure for what to do. But that template is blank because that's where the student thinking goes. So I don't want to have something all filled out. I want to have this template of, this is a great way of getting students to talk. Let me insert it here.
Yeah.
And then I can do that multiple times throughout the year, throughout the semester, because it's a predictable routine that my students know, but it's also one that is student-centered and not me talking. It's them talking to each other. Absolutely.
Yeah, so definitely want to shout out all your templates and resources out there, because, make once, use 7 times. Well, Theresa might have made it, and then you could use it 7 times, 70 times. Because I know, again, going to shout out to Jen Wolf. I know she used a lot of your resources in sharing with me, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is great stuff. And so, inadvertently, you made my fall semester, so thank you, and my spring semester. Thank you, Theresa. Appreciate it. But also too, that goes into, we as teachers, and that's kind of what this book club is about too, are a community of learners. And that's why we want to do this sort of thing. We want to share what we know so that we can all be better and help each other in our helping of students build their relationship with mathematics. So this has been great. So thank you very much for the time. Thank you for just, again, I get a little nostalgia, like thinking about how amazing books are, like how much expertise is in a single book. And it's kind of, so thank you for giving this gift to us in the form of this book. And thanks to Corwin and NCTM for publishing it too. Yeah. And then we get a chance to sit and talk with you. So again, we appreciate your time. Definitely, Theresa.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and helping to spread this information out, because, when teachers can have something that they can read or listen to and then say, oh, I got ideas, let me go and implement. That's how it spreads, and that's how kids become the center of their learning.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, we got a culminating podcast coming up, but thank you so much for watching this, and we will see you soon. Thank you.